Hey everyone, John here from the Deers Embroidery Legacy, and I am so excited to give you an overview of the Design Doodler. This is an amazing program that allows you to doodle your designs into stitches. Now there will be more follow-up videos with more in-depth instructions regarding all of the tools, features, and properties, but for this video I just want to give you a quick overview. Now the first thing you should know is that this is a PC-based program. You can use it on your PC, you can use it with a mouse, or you can use it on a touchscreen with your finger, or if you have a PC pen monitor, it does work best with a pen. And we will include some references with regards to very reasonably priced equipment that you can buy to add on to your laptop or your PC that'll make this so much more fun. Keeping in mind, these monitors that use a pen can be used for any of your hobbies that are graphically based, and it is a real advantage. Now the other thing I wanted to mention is you have an accompanying app for your iPads or your iPad Pros, and it is identical in regards to look and how it performs as your PC version. So there's no, I guess, difference between the two. It's very, very easy to doodle in the comfort of your couch and then take your designs to your PC and fine-tune them later on. Now all of that functionality is in the iPad for the most part, but it is obviously a lot easier to do extensive editing or tweaking on your PC because odds are you'll have a bigger monitor to work on. Now the first thing I'm going to do is show you some of the basic or mainstream features that are found in most programs, but if there is any slight differences, I'll kind of fill you in on how they work within the Design Doodler. So if I look at the very top left-hand side, I have the ability to open a new design. And if you have an existing design there and you go to open a new design, it will ask you if you want to save it. Please make sure you save your files if you're working on them, otherwise you will lose them and get a blank screen that comes up. The next one is Open Designs, and when you go to Open Designs, it works within your regular Windows type of environment where you can go into your selected drive and your selected folder to open your designs, or if you download some artwork, that's where you will find it within your download side. But this is all about design files, and if I look at the files and drop it down, there is various files. There's a bunch of files that are specific to embroidery machine formats, and that is the files that you can bring in, keeping in mind this is not an editing program. So you can bring in an existing design and you can doodle around it and add things to it within the Design Doodler, but you cannot go in and break apart all of your objects the way you would in an editing program. So if you do want to do that, you'll want to use your existing software to do all of your editing, break apart the pieces you want, and then you can bring those completed pieces into the Doodler and doodle and add objects within the program. Now there is also a bunch of file formats for the quilting industry. If you have a long arm quilting machine and you want to doodle some designs, that is an added feature. But the two formats I want to focus on are the JDX and the JDS. Now JDX is the file format specific to the Design Doodler PC version. It will keep all of the original lines, all the nodes, anything you want to edit with regards to property, underlay, tie-in, tie-outs, all of that is built into that native file format. So you want to make sure that you always save your JDX file so that you can bring it into the program and edit it later on. The JDS file is the file format that is specific to the iPad. This incredible accompanying app allows you to doodle at your convenience with your magic pen, and then when you go to save your file, it only has one option on the iPad to save as a JDS. You cannot save out file formats for machines within the iPad version. You need to save it as JDS, and then you can share it or send it to any device or email it or send it by Messenger, Skype to yourself and open it on the actual PC version using the JDS. And that will give you the same functionality to go in and edit your designs and do whatever you need to do on your actual PC. Now the next button is the print button, and this will give you the ability to print your designs as far as your colors are concerned, the specs of the designs, how many stitches, all of that information is within the printout and settings. There's nothing up there right now, but if I go to my settings, there's lots of different things that you can include or not include within your printout so that you have your instructions to run on your machine. Now the next tools are some standard tools available in most programs. You have undos, you can do unlimited undos, so you can sort of back out all of the objects that you created, or you can redo at the same time. There is a cut, there is a copy. If you want to copy what you've doodled and then you want to paste that repetitively, you can use that feature. And then there is the delete. So if you have items that you select, you can delete those in their entirety. Now the other thing that we do have is a text tool, and it's kind of funny because I did mention right away that this is not a lettering program, and it really is not. I added the text tool there for one reason, and that is so that you can document any designs that might have been created by somebody who is a little younger per se. If you have your 4 or 5-year-old grandson or granddaughter create a design, odds are they won't know how to spell their name. So this will give you a very basic tool that will allow you to actually take this text and create the name of the person who did it, and you can actually put in the date or anything that you find significant. And there are only 4 different options as far as texts are concerned. So this is not a lettering feature, this is just a very, very simple tool. You can't go in and space the letters apart. What you get is what you get, but it's very simple, and we put it in there for that reason so that you can save your memories. Now the bottom 3 on the left hand side I'm going to save for later because those are pretty special and I need to dive a little deeper into those for you to understand. On the other side, on the right side of the screen, we have a 3D view. So if you want to view your design in 3D, you can just click that on or off and it'll give you kind of a 3D realistic view of what the stitches will look like. There is a view hoop and there is settings, which we'll get into later, as far as going in and presetting your hoop size, just so you know what area you're going to be working in while you're doodling, and that is based on file extension, and you can custom make your own hoops. I can turn that on or off. I also have the grid on or off, and you can go in and fine-tune your grids as far as how you want to make them appear or look as you're creating or doodling your designs. There is a fit to screen, and this will take whatever you have doodled and will fill up the screen with whatever's done at that time. There is also this one here, which is the fit selected. So if I only have one object selected or a group of objects, then it will just zoom into those objects. So that one's handy as well. We have a one-to-one tool, which will give you the actual size of the design that you've created. We also have these two, which are kind of special to me, because if you've ever done any of my other education on learning how to digitize, I learned at a 6-to-1 scale, and I have taught that people should start to see their designs on screen at a certain size over and over again, so that you know that what you create on screen and what you get when it stitches out are always consistent. And that really does come in handy when you're learning how to doodle. So there is a 3-to-1 scale and a 6-to-1 scale, and toggling between those two is probably the best way to learn how to doodle and control the results when they stitch out on your machine. There is a ghosting feature, which I'll show you later on in another video, but it's very, very cool to kind of ghost objects that you might want to know are there but not know they're there while you're creating other objects, so it'll make it much easier to see. And then this one here, all 4 of these I'll get into later, because those are special tools that require a little bit more information. Now with the bottom row, you have a few different tools. One is select, which you can select the objects, and you'll see that we have this little turquoise box that appears, and you can do things like reshaping a little bit or rotating, some very basic features within the software. I can always undo it by hitting the undo as many times as I want. I also have a select all, which will select everything on the screen. Right now there is only one object created, so select all will do the same thing as the select will. And then the next 3 little buttons that we have are a button for editing the path or path edit. It is a button for inclination edit, which is the stitch directions on fills, and beside it there is an add hole feature if you want to add holes to your fills. So all of the editing capabilities of the Doodler are within these three buttons, and we will go into more depth on those as we start showing you how to create and doodle all of your different objects that you want to do. Now next we have our magnifying glass. When I click on the magnifying glass and it appears, I can either left click to increase on my mouse or right click to go back. If you have that little scroll on your mouse, it will do the same thing. I can always go to my 1:1 if I want to bring it back to full size, but that is how you control zooming in and out. On your iPad, when you choose it on the iPad and you start clicking on the screen with your pen, it will only zoom in. It won't give you the option to go back. So I do suggest you go back to one of the three options, 1:1, 6:1, or 3:1, and that will give you your design kind of back into a reasonable viewing area. We have the pan feature, which will allow you as you're doodling to pan around your designs, and it's very easy to grab, and then you can go back to your other tools. There is a tool that allows you to measure the distance, and we will show you how you can change it from imperial to metric, but that is your measuring tool. The next three are tools for grouping, ungrouping, and then you can align and distribute, kind of adjust your layouts, but we'll cover that in a later video as well. And at the very, very right hand side we have a color canvas where if you don't like the default color, you can actually go in and you can change it to a fabric background, or you can change it to a solid color and make that whatever you want. So if you want something with a little bit more color in there, I can change that to pink, or I can change it back to my default color, which is the white background. Now before I show you the three tools on how to import your artwork, which is loading a backdrop and resizing it, I do want to go back over to the right hand side, and there was 4 tools that we didn't cover, and I'm going to cover those briefly before we go back to the artwork, because we're going to need some of those tools to resize what we're going to do. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that text that I put in there. So I'm going to hit the select, I'm going to grab the select, and then I'm just going to tell it to delete. And now I have a fresh screen. Now if I look at all of these 4 tools, there's one called palette. Palette, when I hit it, will automatically give me a little floating toolbox, and this is all of my thread colors that are available. So I can see that there is 65 default threads that are there, and they aren't really assigned to any brand specifically. They are just default colors that I can play with. If you do want to choose a specific brand, there is quite a few brands that are there within the options. So if you are somebody who likes to use the Madeira Poly Neon and you use the 40 weight, I can hit that and it will give me all of those different colors, and there's a lot more than 65. Generally I do like to just use the regular design palette, and then I can choose whatever threads. If you're like me, I have many different brands that I use, and they're scattered all over the place, and I choose my thread based on the closest color to what I imagine the design looking like. So this can be taken and floated around, exact same thing within the iPad. With an iPad you have a slightly smaller viewing area than the monitor I'm working on here, so I am constantly turning those on and off within my actual iPad, so that I am increasing my real estate as I'm doodling. So that is that tool right there. The next one is actually my properties, and when I bring my properties up right now, there's absolutely nothing in there because I haven't selected anything that has assigned properties. So we are going to dive in very, very deep into all of the features that will show up within the different properties for artwork and for all of the different stitch types, because we have a lot to choose from. The next one here is the sequence view, and this will allow me, as I'm creating my objects, as I'm doodling them, I will be able to see every single object that I've doodled. I'll be able to go in and lock them down, view them, not view them. I can select them and then I can group them or ungroup them with the tools that are along the bottom there that I just showed you. There's a lot of different features here where we can reselect the I guess the sequence of the objects that we create so that we will affect the sewing order. So all of those are there, and the last one here, which is automatically usually on when you start the program, but if it isn't, is our actual widget. And the widget, if I turn it off, it disappeared on my screen. If I turn it on, it appears right here, and I can float this wherever I want. We're going to get a little more into the widget in a couple of minutes, but this is where all of the different tools that I want to use. I have a running stitch, I have a satin stitch or a steel, I have a fill stitch, I have a bean stitch, which is a triple run stitch. I have a tapered ends, automatically tapers the ends. I have calligraphy that gives all the stitches in one direction. I have a pressure sensitive, which works really well when you have the pen tablet monitor or on your iPad. And I also have my applique, which will give me appliques, and I have features within the appliques that we're going to dive into as well. We're just starting to get into all of these different levels, and the beauty of this program is it will give you great results even if you know nothing, but it'll give you even better results if you do understand some of the theory behind it. But I tried to build that in and automate it as much as possible. So we'll get back to that one afterwards. I'll just put my widget over there. And right now I'm going to bring in a piece of artwork. So along the bottom here, I have my load backdrop. And you'll bring your artwork in, and it will allow you to choose between these following art files. They're all raster images, they're bitmaps. I have PNG, JPEG, GIF, and bitmaps. And when I bring these in, I'm going to choose my design that I want to bring in and open it, and when I open that design, it should bring it in on screen. If you open it and it doesn't appear on your screen, then the button right here, which is on right now, I can tell it's on because all of the features, when they're turned on, will turn the little icons from white into a kind of gray circle around it. If I click that gray circle, it's now off, and if I click it back on, it is now on. Now, once my design is on screen, and if you tried to open a piece of artwork and you still didn't get your artwork there because you tried turning it on and off and nothing happened, then odds are your artwork might be saved with a transparent background, or it might be too large, or some things can happen. This happens in every program that creates stitches. You might need to go in and open it up in Paint, resize it a little bit, save it out as a file format, a PNG, and then it will most likely open fine. And we'll make sure we include those little problem-solving situations in a future video as well. But this brought in the artwork, no issues, which usually it does. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the artwork. And when that is on, and then when I click on the artwork and hit select, then you can see that that turquoise box appeared around my artwork. And this is where I get the ability to resize my artwork. The important things you want to remember is I suggest turning on the maintain aspect ratio, because that means that when I change one of these numbers, if I want the width instead of being 20 inches and you got to have a big frame to do a 20-inch design, I might want to do this at, let's say, 5 inches. And when I hit enter, it will change both of them at the same time. Now, when the left and right, the left and top, I do usually like to change these to 0 and 0, just so on my grid, when I get those two set and I hit enter, it gives me that 0, 0 position, and then everything is good. Now I can zoom into this a little bit. I went to my 3:1 scale by just clicking the button over on the right hand side, and this is where if I have a piece of artwork that is really bright or really black, sometimes it's hard to see, because if I want to do a black stitch on a black piece of artwork, you can very easily lose the two. So I can at any time come in, and with the opacity, I can come in here and I can make sure that I dim it down or increase it based on what I visually want to work with. So once I have my artwork all set up, then that is when I'm just going to click off that. I'll click off the image, and now I'm ready to doodle my design because I've imported the artwork, I've resized it to the size I want, and you're ready to go. Now before we get into the advanced features of the Doodler, I have one more thing I need to show you. Down at the very bottom of the right hand side, there's the three little dots within the circle, and when I left click on that, I have some options that come up. One is save, merge, and export image, and those are kind of self-explanatory, but there is a few here where I can view stitches, and usually when I'm creating I want to see that. I can view stitch points, which will give me little dots for penetrations, and that is handy sometimes. I have view outlines, and sometimes I will actually have view outlines on and stitches off. I found that when you're using the Doodler with little ones, they like to see the artwork being created with just lines, and it gives them more of a feel of a traditional app if they're doing it on an iPad, as opposed to seeing stitches rendered, and then you can show them the magic of the stitches coming in afterwards. Viewing commands, which is the trims are identified with a little pair of scissors, and there is some really cool advanced features within the software where I've kind of given people the ability to activate trims within their designs. And I know I'm going to get I guess a lot of support on this one, because I've run a lot of designs on my machines where it's digitized so it looks like there is a jump between and it should trim, but you get that line going across. Well, with the Doodler you have ways to see that, identify it, problem solve it before you ever get to the machine. Now the view entry and exit point, that is good to have on as well, so I might have that activated. And then I do have a redraw, which I love to do a slow redraw on my actual designs so that I can run through them relatively quickly and see how all of the stitching is going to come out before I send it to my machine, kind of giving me a simulated sew out before I actually have to sew it out. Now here there is the license key and the about. Those are just sort of the general things of the software, what your serial number is, all that good stuff, and which version you are running. And the settings is really where we get a lot more things to play with. Now with the settings, there are a couple of different options. There is actually general at the top, there is hoops and grids, and the first one we're going to look at is the general. Now the first thing I'm going to look at is the units, and this is where you can very quickly change from imperial to metric, and I like being able to switch between the two because I still think in design size of embroidery in inches, but I know that the properties, the density, the underlay, the inset values, all of that is within metric, and it is most easily understood. So you can toggle between the two. I'm going to choose it on metric right now because I've imported my artwork, which was in imperial. I resized it to 5 inches, and now I'm going to switch to metric so that when all of my properties come up for my stitch types that I'm doodling, I will be able to know what I'm going to do there. Now there is 4 buttons that you can turn on or off, and I generally tell people to keep them all on for the most part, but there will be situations where you might want them off. Auto close appliques is a really cool feature because it will give you a circle, whatever shape, and automatically registers an applique, and I have a few really fun, cool things to show you later on of ways that you can manipulate your appliques to do all kinds of motifs as well. Now there is a show last stitch marker. That one is definitely on all the time because there is an automated feature where I kind of show people how you can create designs that aren't going to give you unnecessary jumps and trims, and having that on will give you the, I guess, idea of where you last finished off and where you're going to start up again. Auto clean fill outlines. This one is, it's a definite advantage for me because my hand can be a little shaky sometimes, and this will just help me clean up those lines automatically in the back end. And then there is the center design start and stop, which I do always like to have on because we have different types of machines. Some are home machines, which it really isn't an issue. The design always sort of starts and finishes within the hoop. But if you have a commercial machine where you have the possibility of hitting a frame, you want to make sure that your designs always start center center and end center center. So that is automatically going to happen if that is selected. Now on the other side we have all of our tools which are within our widget, and you can go into any of these tools and you can adjust the properties, the preset widths, the densities, and the stitch lengths, and customize them however you want. within the tools. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail, and the reason why is as you really start to doodle, you might choose to change some of these based on your own personal preferences. But for the most part, I just want to let you know I've put in all of the defaults that I feel will be most widely used in most circumstances, and you can change all of these within the properties afterwards. So at this point, just leave them as is, but you can go in and fine-tune and change all of those as far as how you like to doodle. Now the brushes, this is the fun part, because this shows me all of the different tools or brushes that I have available that I mentioned when I showed you the widget. And you can actually go in here and minimize the amount of tools that you see on the widget. So if you are teaching your nephew or niece or grandson or granddaughter how to use the Doodler, you can actually just give them 1, 2, or 3 tools. If you're just doing an applique with them, then just give them the applique tool and don't worry about all the rest. It really simplifies things and makes it much easier to learn, not just for a child but also for a beginner as well. Just use the 3 fundamental stitches, choose the run, the steal, and the fill, and hide the others for now, and it'll just make it a lot less confusing. So that is that window. Now there is also the hoops, and this will give you the ability to go in and choose the hoop that you want, and there's hoops for all of these different file formats, and you can go in and you can add your own custom sizes of hoops. Generally, I will turn the hoop on if I know that I want to stay within a certain hoop size. Other than that, I usually don't use the hoop, so I just doodle as I go through a design, and I can always resize it later on. The other one is the grid, and the grid, you can adjust the spacing of the grids. Its default settings are 10 millimeters for the spacing of the grids and the, I guess, major spacing of it. And this is sort of where you can adjust these, so if you want to see the grids in a solid line or a dashed line or in dots, or if you want to change the spacing, let's say to 1 millimeter all the way across, then it will actually give you a completely different look. I'll just do this for argument's sake so that you can see this, and if I look now at my grid, I can see when I close it, my grid is very, very close together, 1 millimeter little squares, which can be a real advantage when you're learning and you're digitizing at 6:1, because as you're doodling, you're seeing 1 millimeter lines appearing everywhere, and if you notice how they are even transparent behind the artwork, that's something that I love, because a lot of other programs, you bring in that artwork and it covers up your grid, and it's not really serving the purpose that you might want in the learning experience. So this is something that's there, that if you want to have some spacing between your stitches, and you know that a regular density of spacing between 2 stitches for full coverage on a garment is 0.4 or 0.5 millimeters, then my doing looser stitches at 1 or 1.5 will allow the fabric to show through, and that's going to make you a much more artistic doodler. Now we're going to dive into some of the automation that is built into this program. Before I do, I'm just going to open all 3 of my palettes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust them a little bit so they're staggered. I find that this is the easiest way to toggle between my palettes, and I can put them on top of each other, and as long as I have that little top gray area actually showing, it's very easy for me to not use up a lot of real estate but still get the effects I want. Now, back to the buttons that I didn't explain before, but these are some of the key features within the software that makes it actually so embroidery friendly. And when I say embroidery fun for everyone, I mean it. I mean, if you have no experience with embroidery whatsoever and have never created a design, many times you get a program that is geared to digitizing, and there is an extensive learning curve, and you can have problematic results if you don't have the experience. What I did was I went in and looked at all of these tools, and I have them preset to function a specific way behind the scenes so that you will get good, if not great, or half decent results. It's kind of one of those things where, as a person with my experience, I might not want unnecessary tie-outs or tie-ins, but they are so small that if you are not experienced and you're running a machine, you would never notice that they were or weren't there unless you had an issue with them, and you wouldn't really know until your thread pops out and you can just unravel the embroidery. So I set this up so that you have the ability to turn things on and off depending on how much you know how to use them. But when they are turned on, you have to think of it almost like autopilot. You know, you're an autopilot, you're going to have safe results, you're not going to crash the design, so to speak, that you're creating. So this one right here, which is the auto tie, that can be left on or off. And I do like to have it on for the most part for somebody who is new to doodling. But if you know how to control all of the stitch types that I'm going to show you, you can turn them off in certain times so that you'll have better results. So I'm going to show you pretty much everything in future videos of when and where you would want to use those so that you can become a more proficient doodler and get the most out of this incredible program. Now, the other thing on the other side is a tool that is actually called Snap to Anchor. And Snap to Anchor is an incredible tool because it allows you to doodle and to continue on a path and not have to worry about multiple trims and jumps or objects that are being created as you're doing it. It'll automatically join everything together based on the stitch type, not multiple stitch types, but the stitch type that you're using. It'll automatically join them together. That is why within my other settings, I showed you within the settings here that there is a show last stitch marker. That is why I like to have that on all the time, because if it's on and if I'm using the tool that allows me to basically go in and snap to anchor, it gives me that reference point that I'm looking for. So, give you an idea, I'm going to just move my little widget up, and you're going to see that there is a running stitch, there is a steal, there is a fill stitch, there is a bean, there is the tapered edges, everything I showed you before. But when I click on the running stitch, it will make that widget kind of compress down and just give me the features within the running stitch. And I do have different things I can play with, whether it is a straight line or freehand or some basic shapes as well. So if I am doing a circle, I can just literally drag that circle and turn it into stitches. And I'll undo that real quick. I'm going to change the color by going to my palette, and I'll just choose a bright red color instead. And again, just drag that little circle and it's changed it into an actual running stitch. Now, here's the other part is I can go in and choose a circle, but I can also go into the stitch length. And the stitch lengths go from 2 to 2.5 to 3. You can actually use those as defaults, which is what I did. I go all the way up to 6 millimeters. If you go over 7 millimeters, then generally you would want to have a stitch that actually goes and knocks down in between the two, because you don't want to register jump stitches. So I did give you some safe parameters to work within the software, so you don't have to worry about bad things happening. Now if I choose, let's say, a 2 millimeter stitch and I create the same type of object at pretty much the same size, you'll see that between the two, one is a little bit cleaner around the edges than the other, and that is because this one has a longer stitch length, the first one, the second one has a shorter stitch length. If I select either one of these objects, so I'm going to select this one here, and if I click on my properties box now, I can see that it's showing a run stitch. I can do a double run or a single run within run stitch. It's showing me whether I want a bean stitch. I can drop my stitch at the anchor, which is what I have set right now. I'm not going to get into the commands right now. We'll get into that later. But I can go in here and very quickly adjust the stitch length. And you can see as I make it longer, all the way up to 10 millimeters, that circle turned into a square because there's only 4 points that it's seeing at that stitch size. But as I make it smaller, that circle becomes more and more defined. I can go all the way down to 0.5 millimeter. I can go down to 0.1, which you definitely don't want to do that because you're going to hammer too many stitches into one area. But at 0.5 millimeter, your machine will drop those stitches. So if I want to do really, really fine detail, I have some tiny little text that I'm actually digitizing, and I want it to sew it legibly on the item, then I can take that object that I've digitized. If it's lettering, you know, running stitch letters, I can knock it down to 0.5 millimeters and it will give me a much cleaner representation. So you do have control over all of your stitch types past the point of what you choose within your widget. So I can come in here now to, again, there's my brush tool. I'm going to go, which is a running stitch. I'm going to go to my freehand, and I can come in here now, and let's change the color. I just have to click on the palette, and I'm going to change this to, let's say, a blue color instead, or actually let's choose this one here. I'll do it as a purple color, so this one here, and I can come in and just very easily draw whatever shape I want, and it's going to create it. Now here is what we're going to look at pretty closely, is that I have one line that I've drawn, and because my tie in is on, it's going to automatically tie in at the beginning and it ties out at the end. So that is where it is. Now here, this is my last point. You'll notice that because my anchor point is on, if I start right where I left off, I can continue to draw that line, and it did not create a tie out until it ended at the point I just created. And then if I want to keep going here, I can go on and do as much as I want. I can come up to the top of the screen and end, and then if I need to pan down, I can pan down the screen with my little hand from the panning, and then I can go back to my brush, and I need to make sure that I choose my brush tool so that I choose the size of the stitch, and as soon as I do, the hand disappeared and I'm back to my drawing mode, and I can just continue on and draw as much as I want, and it will give me that automation of having a start and a stop that is going to have a tie in and a tie out command automatically set within the design. So that is an awesome feature of automation within this software. I can have the 3D on or off. It's just as responsive either way. And if I then go to look at the next tool, which is the steel, and I click on it, I have a couple more options because I have the steel, which is going to be as a freehand, and I have the same shape, so I can do a freehand mode. I have the width of the stitch because I have a satin stitch, and it goes all the way from 0.5 millimeters all the way up to 6 millimeters. So if I want to do a 2 millimeter satin stitch, and I'm going to change the actual color of this, let's do a gold color, I can start right here, and I can also control the density. The density will be preset at 0.4 millimeters. I made sure that the standard default density that we usually always use for embroidery for full coverage is automatically there, but you can go in and you can lessen the density from 0.4 to 2 millimeters if you want. So, and this one is a higher density at 0.3. I didn't go below 0.3 because I knew that you would have hard stitch intensive designs. So if I choose that density and then I start to draw, you'll see a line appear on your screen. When I let go, it actually gives me that end mark, so I know where I ended. And if I go midway between the two, I always want to start on a satin stitch halfway in between. I can continue on and it will continue the path. It's not going to give me two separate objects. It's going to define it as one object with the tie in and tie out just there. I can continue on. It will automatically give me curves or miters based on that. When I go into the property control, I'm going to grab everything real quick, and let's just delete that so that I can show you again. I'm going to come in here, choose my satin stitch, choose that density. I'm going to come here and I'm just going to create a line, any type of line I want, something like that. It's automatically given me my points. If I want to continue on, I just go to that little halfway mark where I finished off, and I can continue the path as much as I want. I can pan over, do anything. This is the fun of the Doodler. Automation and great stitch results every time. Now when you come here and you select this object, so I'm going to select it, and then if I look at my sequence view and I go down, it shows it as one object, not multiple, but as one object. And if I go to my properties, I have a stitch width, so I can very easily just increase the stitch width up or down. Even though I've set it, I'm not necessarily set to that. I can change it afterwards. So I'm going to change that back to 2 millimeters, 1.9. I can always highlight it, hit 2, and now it's 2. I can change the density, and I can do it at the click, just by that little slider back and forth. So change the density to 0.6 millimeters. I can change the angle of my stitches. And if I ever get to an angle that's not friendly, sometimes it will say, nope, can't do it, and it'll give me a solid line. So there is filters built in that will help to accommodate that. And then there's an inset where I can go in or outside from the original line that I created, so that I know if I'm doing a fill stitch with a border and the border is too far out or in, I can take that satin stitch and inset it towards the outside or the inside. There's so many tools and automation in here that it is awesome. Okay, there is also the ability to change corners from a sharp to a beveled, and it will give you all different types, to a rounded. It'll give you different corners based on your artwork. You can choose mitered ends or auto turned or lapped ends. It will, that obviously I don't want, but the software automatically did it. So I'll try an auto turn and it gives me a turn, or I can come here and do mitered and it will miter the ends of that. I can do the mitered distance. I have a lot of control in there. Then I can get into the other drop downs, which is underlay. I have different underlay, parallel, contour, or zigzag. So if I want to add zigzag underlay, it's at a click of a button. I select whatever items I want and I can add underlay. I can change the density of that underlay, the inset value. If I want to add a edge run or a contour, I click a button and it is done. So again, just so much control within. Easy control. That's the whole point of this. It is simple. It's simple, it's easy, and you can basically add things just at the click of a button. Now the commands I'm not going to get into quite yet, because that is going to be for more advanced doodling, so to speak, because as much as this is automated, there is going to be circumstances where you will want to have a little bit more control. Old school control based on how much you learn from all the videos I'm going to be posting, and there is going to be a lot of education on this, because any software is only as good as the education. But we're going to have tons of videos that are going to show you different circumstances where you will be able to change a lot of these presets, from the auto tie-in off, turning the anchors on and off. But I got to show you one more thing, and this is amazing. It works within a running stitch, a satin stitch, and it gives you a further element of automation. So let's just grab that, delete it, and I'm going to just use, again, and I'll change that color one more time. Let's just choose a pink color this time instead. I'm going to choose a wider stitch, 0.5 millimeters. Let's choose a little bit less density, and I'm going to start to just digitize lines. And I'm going to make sure that these lines are very random, but they're going to connect in certain areas. If I turn off my 3D, you're going to see all of these staggered little jumps, okay? And if I go in to my 3 dots at the bottom and turn on my commands, you're going to see that there's a trim function there, and there's tie-ins and tie-outs after every single object. So this is definitely something you do not want to do, but I can just continue on and make as many little points as I want. And then we have what I like to call a basic branching tool. So this will allow you to choose a running stitch or a satin stitch, keeping in mind you cannot choose different widths of stitches or alternating stitch lengths. It has to be one width or one stitch length if it's a running stitch, one width if it's a satin stitch. But all I have to do is come in and select that item. So if you've digitized other colors, just select the items that you want that are connecting together, and you will see that this one here, the auto branching, I click on it and it automatically branched everything together as one. And that works exactly the same way for a running stitch. So if I'm actually doing running stitches and I'm coming here and I'm doing all kinds of points, and you can see all those little tie-ins and tie-offs, the trims that are happening. But I don't want that because that is going to just be terrible on my machine. I can do as much detail as I want, and then I'm going to select that color, branch it together, and I have a perfectly branched piece that I've doodled, but I didn't have the experience to start and end where I wanted because it was going to take too long, too frustrating. So that is incredible automation that is built in. Now another thing, and this is the last tool on this side, and that is the closed shape. If I am doing a circle with a satin stitch, it's actually pretty easy because we know it's going to be a closed shape, and I can see that it's automatically closed everything around that shape. But if I come over here, and let's just turn off our grid on the background for a second, and let's pan over to the other side, and let's do that again. So let's come back over here and choose the same density. Let's make sure you got to choose the density to create the shape, because I was in panning mode, so you want to get out of panning mode and into the widget or stitch type mode, and I chose the brush. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to the same thing but freehand, and I'm going to do a freehand shape. So I'm going to come here and grab this, and I'm going to come all the way back until it's almost to that point, and let's just grab that shape and tell it to close it, and it's going to automatically close the shape that I'm working on. That works within a running stitch as well. So if I'm continuing a path and I don't want to have that gap there, I just get really close, I select that object, and I can close the shape so that it automatically fills in those lines as it goes through. So anyways, I hope you're impressed, because there is, it looks so simple, but I guarantee you there was a lot of engineering and testing and retesting that went in to make all of this happen the way it does. Now I'm going to add a fill stitch, and again, creating a fill stitch, super easy to do. All I'm going to do, if I want to draw this manually, is I'm going to come here, go all the way around the inside of the line and let go, and it's going to fill that area in. I can then look at the properties. I can come here and I can say I want to grab that fill stitch, so I'm going to grab the properties of that fill, and we have the ability to travel on edge to choose different patterns. So you have different patterns of fills from pattern 1 to smooth. It will change the look of that. I can change the density by sliding across, making it looser or wider. I can also come in here and do a travel on edge, which this is kind of like a knockdown stitch or a hatch smash stitch, or whatever people call it depending on your software brand. We got to come up with a doodle smash. So we have the doodle smash stitch, which will give me a travel on edge doodle smash set at 1.2 millimeters, because 1.2 millimeters is what I've always suggested for a doodle smash. And when we take that, I can go in and increase and decrease my smash. And I can also tell it to, clean outlines. I can add underlay. So if I want to add, let's say, an underlay under there, I could actually do that. And now I have a base for lace. I mean, that also rhymes too, but a base for. So I have so much control within this software, even though it's simple, even though you can use it in its most simplest form and create stuff that'll run well on your machine. Behind each of those layers, there's more layers of control of what you can actually do to make this software work. I'm going to go back to the undo, because I can do unlimited undos, and I'm going to get this back to the original fill that I had there, and I played around with this quite a bit, but I want to add a hole to the center of this. So it's almost done now. Back one more time, and let's just go over here. And there we go. So there's the original one that I did. I'm going to select that fill again. Well, it's selected. On the bottom, I have the ability to add a hole to my fill. I click on that, and what I'm going to do is I have to tap down on the hole. You don't draw, you literally tap on the screen if you're on an iPad, or you will click with your mouse. I'm just left clicking with my mouse, and once I make that hole, then I hit that button again and tell it to add the hole. And now it's automatically added a hole to that fill stitch. So all of the features that you'll normally find in a digitizing program, they are built in and automated within the Doodler as well. Well, now I'm going to show you a couple of the features, the basic features within the editing tools, and let's just select everything, and I'm going to get rid of all of those items so we have kind of a fresh screen to work with, and I'm going to very quickly just create 3 different objects. So let's go back to here. I need to choose my fill stitch, and I am going to choose my density. Now I can have my little arrow back, so I'm going to just create any object I want, and I'll make 1 stitch like that, keeping in mind that if I don't like that color, I can select that color, go to my palette, and let's just choose a different color so that we can see it on screen. So you can change colors as easy as selecting them and is within a group of objects, or just select what you want and change the color just by clicking on a different color. Now I'm going to choose, and actually I'm going to change it to a slightly different color than that as well, because I want to make sure that we see some of the different objects. So let's choose a blue, okay, and now I'm going to choose a satin stitch. So I'm going to choose the steel, and I'm going to make sure the width is set at, let's say, 3 millimeters, and the density is fine there. So let's just do a satin stitch like this, and there's my satin stitch. And then I'm going to do a run stitch as well, and let's do a 3 millimeter stitch. So let's just grab this one here. So there we go. There is my 3 objects. Now, keeping in mind that when I click on this again and I'm seeing my different objects, I can view stitches, which if I turn off the 3D, there's all the different stitches, so that allows me to view stitches. I can turn that one off. Stitch points, sorry, that was stitch points. View stitches, if I click that, everything disappears. That is because that they aren't actually showing, but I can convert to outlines, so I can just see the outlines, or I can have both on where I see stitches and outlines. So it really depends on what you want to see as far as what you're creating. Now I'm going to turn the outlines off for 1 second, and let's just turn off the outlines, and I'm going to select the first running stitch. So I have it selected here. I can see it selected within my sequence view. Now I'm going to go to my edit path, and when I edit the path, I can see that a little green for start and a red for stop. So I can control within this path where my start and stop points are. So if you want to change the start and stop point of your object, you can by editing it. That also works after it's been branched, so if you don't like the way it kind of pathed the branching, you can edit the start and stop so that it's friendlier for you to pick up to the next object. Now I also have my nodes where I can come in here, and let's go to properties for a second, but I have my nodes here, and I can change this shape by nodes, and it is Bezier, which means that I have handles on these nodes that I can change the shape of an object. Also keeping in mind that I could decrease the stitch length so that I get a cleaner line like I showed you before. Now I can also come in here and I can tell it that I want this node to actually be, instead of smooth, a straight point. So I can do a cusp symmetrical, so it'll change it to symmetrical, it'll change it to straight. I can fine-tune all of my nodes however I want, which means that going in and editing your designs, you have, there's no limitations to how much you can go in and edit your objects afterwards. And that is the exact same thing for an actual satin stitch. I can actually, when I select it, I can either select, I can, I guess if I do this, I can grab this one, I can change the nodes if I want. I can actually add nodes to an object, so if I go in here again, I can click on add nodes, and if I click on here now, I can, actually it selected the wrong object, but I'll do that here anyways since it selected the fill. I was selecting the fill, but I can add nodes to a object and actually change it so that there's another node there, and I can delete those nodes if I want. So let's actually delete this node. So if I actually add nodes, then I can select that node that I just added. I can have it come out like that. I can go in here and I can make it straight if I want. So you can go in and adjust everything you want to any object. I can go in and change the start and stop of my fills. I can come in here and do the same thing with these satin stitches. I can adjust the satin stitches, I can adjust the start and stops on those stitches. So there's really no limitations to how much you can edit, and it is all between these, this one button right here. Now if I do come in here and grab that fill, I can grab that fill, and instead of editing the path, I can go one over to the inclination, and this will allow me to change the direction of my fills. So you aren't set to the standard fill direction. You can go into each of your fills and change them, which is great for defining different colors and depths, and doing one fill over top of another and changing the direction gives you a lot more, added stuff to the design that you would, basically not get anywhere else. Now keep in mind here, I have this one chosen, and I am trying to change the direction. It's not going to do anything because it only works within a fill stitch. So you can't change the direction of that satin path because it's automatically changing directions. But if I do come in here and select this object, if I want to change the angles, I always have the ability to come in and change the angles based on what you see here within that little scroll bar. So there is absolutely no limitations to how much you can edit anything you doodle. So it's all about having fun, experimenting, adding underlay. Everything is at a click of a button. So I can add an underlay to that, and I can do, actually parallel would be more for a fill stitch, just so you know. Parallel underlay is for a fill stitch. So when I come here and I add parallel, there is my parallel underlay. On a satin stitch, you would more than likely want to have a contour or a zigzag or a combination of both. So it's all built in there. Now as you can see, there's a lot of automation built into this behind the scenes so that you're always going to get good results, whether you're brand new or whether you've been embroidering or digitizing for quite a while. You're going to doodle and it's going to sew out very well on the machine. Now the one thing that I wanted to show you is that we do give you the option to have more control. And what I mean by that is the auto tie in, tie out function is a big advantage, because when you use a running stitch and you start here and you go, as long as you snap to the next anchor, it will continue and only give you one tie in and tie off. But when we end up doing the same thing with a running stitch, and then I want to switch to a satin stitch, and I continue on that path, and then I go back to a running stitch, and I can continue on this path, I'm actually not just generating a tie-in and a tie-out at the beginning and the end. I have tie-ins and tie-outs after each of the objects, which isn't really a big deal. To the naked eye, which is at a 1-to-1 scale, you wouldn't really see it. It'll still run fine on your machine, and you won't really have any big issues. But I know that from an old school puncher like myself, who really focuses on the theory, and that's where I tried to build in my theory to the automation of what a person can do. I also wanted to give you guys the ability to go old school, take off the autopilot, or at least half the autopilot. We're going to leave the snap to anchor on, but we're going to turn off the actual auto tie-in and have the ability to control what we're doing. So if I go over here now and go back to my objects, and let's just leave that one where it is. I'm going to choose my run, and let's choose a stitch length. So now I'm back to being able to do that. I'm going to actually come here and choose a different color so we can see it on screen. So let's choose that one. I'm going to start out by doing this object here, and it's going to give me a start and a stop because my auto tie-in is on. So now I'm going to go and turn that off. And now that it is off, it's no longer grayed or highlighted. When I do the exact same thing, it's going to give me no tie-in and tie-offs, which is in theory a very bad thing. You want to make sure that your objects tie in and tie out, otherwise your thread will unravel. But there is a reason or a method for my madness. I'm going to continue on now with a satin stitch, and then I'm going to go back to a running stitch, and then I'm going to go back to a satin stitch, and I can continue this path of going between the two for as long as I want. And if I make sure that my tools are turned on so that I do have my view commands here. I can see that there is right there a command where it's starting a tie-in, and here is my tie-out. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my sequence view, and I'll drop this down so I see all of the objects that I created. So there's the 4 objects that I just created within the blue, and let's turn that on to 3D so you can see them. And what I want to do is I want to go into that very first object, and then I'm going to go to my properties. And within my properties there is a drop down that says commands. And when I go to my commands, I have the ability to control my tie-ins and tie-offs. So I want to make sure that on the beginning of this object, I'm going to make sure that it ties in. So I'm going to do a basic tie-in. I also have the ability to do a triangle if I want. That'll give me a little triangle tie-in, and if I get rid of that on screen, you can see the little triangle there. So I'm going to grab that object again. I'm just going to do a basic tie-off, so let's get rid of the triangle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my sequence view. I'm going to unclick the first one, but I'm going to go to the very last one. And on the last one, now that it is selected, I'm going to go to the properties, and I'm going to go to the commands, and I'm going to go to the tie off. And I'm just going to go down and tell it that I want a basic tie off. And now what I've done is I've created a tie in at the beginning of all of those objects and a tie off at the very end. So it's given me the control that as a old school digitizer or puncher, I still can go into a manual pathing mode and start to control how my objects within different stitch types tie in and tie out where they should. I could just leave it on, leave it in autopilot, and for the most part that would be kind of okay. But if you really want to learn the right way, the features and tools are built in so that you have control. And that's what it's all about, a program that has automation but still an incredible amount of control to get really good results. Now I have one more thing I'm going to show you, and then we'll probably back out of this introductory lesson, which is showing you an overall of what this software can do, and I'll digitize the design in another lesson very quickly that you saw on screen before, and we'll give you the artwork for that in your classroom, and you'll be able to follow along with me and generate that simple design. Now within our widget, we still have 5 other stitch type tools that are available. We have the bean stitch, we have the tapered ends, we have calligraphy, we have pressure sensitive, as well as the applique tool, which we can also use to create motifs. So in future videos, we will go over the details of each one of those. Now we're just going to add the icing on top of the cake, and I'm going to show you something that I think will make sense to those of you who have been embroidering for a while and had that little issue I talked about earlier where you think there should be a trim between 2 objects, but your machine just sort of sews and then jumps over and starts sewing again, and you have that irritating little thread that you have to manually trim out. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. Let's just grab this object right here, and let's turn off our 3D view, and we'll get rid of that one. So if you look at that, there's a tie in and a tie off, and there is a tie in and tie off, but it actually left a actual connector between the two because there's not enough jumps to register a trim. So I'm going to get rid, actually, let's go back to this one. Let's just get rid of that color altogether just so that we're focusing on the one. I'm going to use the delete button on the app, not on my keyboard. I found that the delete button on the app just deletes everything. Once in a blue moon, when I hit that delete button on my keyboard, something kind of funny happens, so just a little warning. But here, if I look at the first object, there it is, so it ties in, ties out, and then it does the next object here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that very first object, but let's zoom in a tiny little bit just so you can see it on screen. I'll pan down a little bit as well, and I'll turn the 3D on for a second. You can see that connecting stitch that's between those 2 objects. So what I'm going to do is turn this off again on the 3D, grab that first object so that it's highlighted, and then I'm going to go to my properties once again, and I'm going to go down, but here I have commands. Now the command for the start is set at normal and the end is set at normal. But what I'm going to do is on that end command, before it jumps over, if I hit that little toggle down, I have all these different things where I can put in a stop function, which is in essence a color change or a frame out if you're doing an applique, or I can do a jump or a trim. So I'm going to put a trim command right there. And if you look, a little pair of scissors appeared and I have a trim that's going across there now. But when I turn on the 3D, I still see that little line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next object and I'm going to say to that object, at the beginning of that object, I want to not have a normal, but I want to have a jump. So if I turn it to jump, you now can see that it has disappeared. This is, I know some of you are just smiling ear to ear right now because that is something that you have had issues with for a long, long time. Keep in mind, this is not an editing program. You can't go in and fix your existing design files that you got from somebody else and change that, but this is something where you're doodling. We are giving you a very easy to use program that is just going to give you amazing stitch results. And if you want to go in there and fine tune something that you don't necessarily like, you have all of the features and powers to change every single aspect of your designs, from density to underlay to insets to angles to tie-ins to tie-offs to commands at the beginning or the end of objects. So this is going to be so much fun. I'm going to wrap this up now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Watch it through a couple times, play with it on your software and on your iPad app. You're going to find that all the features are identical on both in the same place. So anyways, have fun, keep on doodling, and catch the next lesson where we're going to digitize that design.